Welcome back to Bold Dominion, a state politics explainer podcast for a changing Virginia. I'm Mary Garner McGehee. Well, I promised on our last episode that we'd be back with our usual wonky content, and I think this episode delivers. This week, we're talking about affordable housing policy. I don't think I need to convince anyone that housing is an incredibly important issue. As you'll hear in this episode, about 44% of all renters in Virginia pay more than 30% of their income in rent. So what is Virginia doing about it? What's the role of state government in affordable housing policy? To answer these questions, I have a couple experts on the podcast.
I am Christie Marra. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy for the Virginia Poverty Law Center.
I'm Overton McGehee. I'm Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity Virginia. We're the state support organization for the 37 Habitat chapters in Virginia. Habitat for Humanity helps low-income residents build and purchase homes.
And you're my dad.
And a proud father with a face for radio.
That's right. I knew he'd make a great guest because he's been teaching me about affordable housing for over 20 years. I've been told that when I was little, I gave him the nickname Habidad. Get it? Like Habitat for Humanity? Okay, but for real, thank you for indulging a little nepotism because these two know so much about housing in Virginia. All right. So we're going to talk mostly about state housing and state funding and regulation, but there's also a lot of federal and local housing policy. So to start off, could y'all just give us a quick overview of how each level of government contributes to housing policy and funding?
So let's brush the treetops here, okay? So on the federal level, the housing choice vouchers are important, and so are the low-income housing tax credits, which incentivize the construction of more affordable rental units. And those are the two biggest on the federal level, and then there's a new federal housing trust fund.
And we also have things that can contribute to housing, like the Community Development Block Grant, which is federal funding that passes through to local governments. That's one example.
Right, and home funds, many of us have found very useful, but they are the most vulnerable to cuts by annual efforts by the Congress.
And what do home funds go towards?
Oh, gosh, like in Virginia, most of the down payment assistance has been funded by home funds. And also, a lot of localities get home funds every year. Entitlement communities like Charlottesville and Richmond get home funds every year, which they put into a variety of affordable housing efforts.
And let's not forget, when we're talking about federal funding, all of the federal funding that comes through HUD to support low-income housing, not just in terms of the low-income housing tax credits, which go through the tax people, the Department of Tax, but funding for all of our different forms of public and subsidized housing, whether that's conventional public housing or Overton already mentioned the housing choice vouchers, but there are also various forms of federally subsidized public housing specifically for elderly folks or folks with some type of disability. So we are currently seeing funds from the federal government flowing to housing in a number of different ways.
Right, including public housing, right. Mm-hmm. In Virginia, one of the things that's been very helpful is the USDA 502 direct loan program for low-income rural home buyers, and that got cut in half by Congress recently, and it's really slowed things down in rural communities.
Well, and let's not neglect to mention that funding for public housing has never been sufficient. I think from the time it started, it has not been sufficient. And with the limitation placed on creating new units during the Nixon administration, we now have the further constraint of there not being an overall net gain in public housing since that time.
Again, we'll get into state a lot, but can you talk a little bit about the role that local governments play?
Well, zoning's pretty important.
Yeah, so I think you've got, obviously zoning, I think, is the biggest thing that local governments essentially control. But there are also some funding mechanisms that we see. There are local governments such as the city of Richmond that has its own affordable housing trust fund. And then we've seen other initiatives locally. The one that I'm most familiar with in the city of Richmond is the $500,000 that they put in the current budget to fund lawyers for eviction defense. So that's another example.
And local governments are getting more interested in funding affordable housing. You certainly see that in Charlottesville and Albemarle, and Henrico just put in a big chunk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thinking about Virginia, can you kind of give us a sense of the level of need for affordable housing?
Well, I mean, about half of the renters in Virginia are cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for rent, and about a quarter are paying more than half of their income for rent.
And several years ago, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission did a study at the direction of the General Assembly looking at affordable housing, and they determined that there was a need for, if I'm getting this right, over 200,000 new units of affordable housing in the Commonwealth. And I think that was just rental. And then there was a need for additional units of affordable homeownership.
And it's interesting to see local governments beginning to wake up to the need for more units and starting to change their zoning to make that possible.
Yep. Slowly and not without meeting resistance. If you think about Arlington and their missing middle struggle, right?
You want to explain missing middle?
You know, they're talking about things that are not single family, but not multifamily, like triplexes, duplexes, 4-unit buildings that can be integrated into a community. And what Arlington was trying to do was to enable developers to do that by right instead of needing some kind of zoning variance. And they were sued by community members, and I do not have the outcome. I don't know if there's been a ruling in that case yet. But it's not without controversy to expand housing choice, is sadly true.
Popping in with a little update on this. So back in the fall, the Arlington County Trial Court ruled in favor of the plaintiff residents who opposed the inclusionary zoning. But on Tuesday, November 19th, Arlington County announced that they would be appealing the decision. So it is a little bit unsettled still. Okay, back to the interview. And how does the state or organizations define housing as affordable? What makes something affordable housing?
Well, we've got the age-old, I believe, federal definition, which says that you shouldn't be paying more than 30% of your income toward your housing and utilities. I think, and I think it was Overton who taught me this, that 30%, while it might be okay for a tenant, it is not really affordable for a homeowner, given the fact that there are maintenance needs that you need to set aside money for, so that affordable housing for a homeowner, really, those homeowners should not be paying more than 25% of their income toward their mortgage.
And then there's, the area median income measures, which looks at what's the median income in a certain area, and then where does your income compare to the median? And that is often used as a standard for whether people qualify.
It is. I really struggle with the use of area median income. I think it's an important measuring tool. But I do sort of cringe every time somebody in leadership in the government talks about 80 to 120% AMI as the group that they're trying to target with this or that policy. Because, we serve people at Legal Aid who are well below 80% area median income. I would say all of them are below 60% area median income. And then when you start talking about folks who are qualifying for public housing, at least initially, they're even lower than that, many at 30% area median income and below.
Yeah, I work for Habitat, obviously, and we work with families who earn 25% to 60% of area median income. And there are a few affiliates that go as high as 80%. But there's a lot of need, particularly between 0% and 60% of area median income.
And one thing that I want to emphasize is that you all are successful in serving that population. And by that, I mean, you are helping families who earn under 60% area median income find and maintain really nice housing. And I think we need to be talking more about that, because I do think there's a lot of folks out there who think, what are you going to do under 60% AMI? You really can't serve people long-term who are at that income level, and that's simply not true.
Right. And of course, there are a lot of successful subsidized rental for folks who earn less than 60% of AMI. But our niche, of course, is we sell homes to families who earn less than 60% of area median income. And they're, they have to be determined to become homeowners. And the successful Habitat homeowners are very good budgeters. There's often not room in that budget for a pizza.
It seems to me that state housing policy kind of takes two main forms. There's funding and then there's regulation. What would you all say are the most impactful state funding interventions?
So I work a lot on trying to improve the rights of tenants. And we know that historically, especially in Virginia, there has been a significant imbalance of power between private landlords and their tenants. And so we've been working hard, and members of the General Assembly have been responding beautifully with some of the legislation they passed to try to start leveling that playing field and creating more balance there. And so one thing that has moved toward a little bit more balance is a fund called the Virginia Eviction Reduction Program. And this began back in, I want to say it was initially funded in 2020 in response to the National Eviction Lab finding that the cities with the highest eviction rates were here in Virginia. We had way more than anybody else. And so the Virginia Eviction Reduction Program provides funding to local and regional nonprofits who can then use those funds to help their community members avoid eviction in any way that makes sense to them. And that means the earlier the better. There are lots of federal programs that have existed in the past that required a tenant to already have gotten an eviction notice from their landlord before they could access the funding. And we know now that that eviction notice by itself can sometimes show up on a tenant screening report and really hurt that person's chances of getting better housing in the future. With this state money, there's none of that. If you come into, for example, 4Kids, which is down in the Hampton Roads area, and you say, look, I had to pay X amount on a medical bill or a car payment, and I'm $500 short for my rent, which is due in a week, they can give you that $500. They don't have to wait until you actually are late. That's been tremendously helpful. There was an evaluation of the first year of that program done by RVA Eviction Lab that gave it super high marks. It found that the eviction rates in every zip code that had VERT funding available to tenants, those eviction rates across the board went down. So it's a good program. I wish there were more funding, but it's definitely a success.
And what do you think? What's the most impactful state funding policy?
One theme you're going to hear us talk a lot about today is that housing is suddenly a bipartisan issue in Virginia. And you see that so clearly in the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. So we all lobbied for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund for a couple of decades, and we would joke that it had passed both houses. It just hadn't passed them in the same year. And so finally it passed. It was signed into law without any funding in Governor McDonnell's administration. And then the Commonwealth started putting $4 million a year in general revenue in it, which was a big change for the Commonwealth of Virginia. In the past, no state money that I'm aware of had gone into, well, I shouldn't say no. There were some exceptions like the Indoor Plumbing Fund and some efforts with homelessness prevention. But what happened 3 years ago in Governor Northam's last budget, the state funds going into the Virginia Housing Trust Fund went from $8 million a year to $75 million a year. And so that was 3 years ago when suddenly we realized, oh my gosh, it's finally happened. Affordable housing has become a bipartisan issue in Virginia. And Virginia DHCD is charged with using that trust fund, and they have used it in ways that gets a lot of leverage with programs that address homelessness, with affordable rental, for example, using it as the gap funding for low-income housing tax credit rental buildings to be built to be affordable rentals, and some for home ownership. And you see a great example of that here in Charlottesville. Charlottesville Habitat has bought trailer parks to prevent displacement, to redevelop them to a higher density, make them mixed income, and include affordable housing for the people who've always lived there. And because of the Housing Trust Fund, the Commonwealth of Virginia has been able to help greatly with that project. And it's probably the largest habitat project in the U.S. right now. It's rezoned for 1,200 units of mixed income, and the first 49 families are moving out of their mobile homes and buying their townhouses this year. They helped build them, and they will have interest-free mortgages from Habitat, and they have some forgivable mortgages that come from the Virginia Housing Trust Fund.
And then over on the regulation side, what would you say are some of the most impactful state housing regulations?
So there have been some pretty significant changes to the law in terms of tenant rights. One of them is what we call the extended right of redemption. So until about 4 or 5 years ago, if you couldn't pay your rent and you were sued by your landlord and you had a court date, if you didn't pay everything that you were sued for on or before that first court date, but then you later came and said, before the eviction happened, hey, Mr. Landlord, I have all your money, the landlord could have said, thank you very much for the money, but I am still going to evict you. And they would give them a little note that said, I am accepting this rent, but reserving the right to evict you. And that would be that. With the new extended right of redemption, even if a tenant comes to that landlord 3 days before the sheriff's eviction is scheduled and pays everything that she owes, the landlord can no longer say, oh, well, thank you very much, but I'm still going to evict you. If she pays everything she owes, including the court costs and attorney's fees and whatnot, as long as they're contracted for, then the landlord has to cancel that eviction. And if he does it, knowing that she has paid everything she owed, he could be liable to her for thousands of dollars under another new law that allows tenants to sue their landlords if they are unlawfully evicted. So that is a new rule that I think is really helpful in the tenant rights area.
Let's talk about some of the recent General Assembly sessions. What were some of the major housing priorities over the past couple years?
One thing that has been a continued focus is trying to reduce evictions and trying to make sure that evictions do not continue to be a scarlet E on a tenant's record. And by that, I mean, you have an eviction filing on your record. Let's say you paid it off in time to get that eviction case dismissed, because that can happen. You pay everything off before the first court date or at the first court date, the judge is going to dismiss that case. And until last year, those eviction cases stayed on your record and they could keep you from getting the housing that you wanted to move into. Now, those eviction cases became eligible for expungement. And so a tenant could file a petition and say, hey, this case was dismissed, and it could be removed from their record. As of July 1st of this year, moving forward, the vast majority of those eviction cases that are dismissed will be automatically expunged after a certain period of time. So those are big things for our tenant population. So that was a very recent General Assembly that just went into effect July 1st.
Y'all have also had some victories on mobile home park legislation in recent years. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The biggest thing that we got through legislatively in this area was our notice requirement bill. And we worked with Delegate Paul Krizik up in Northern Virginia on this. You know, most mobile home park owners these days don't really decide, oh, I'm going to put my park up for sale. They get offers. They get unsolicited offers for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from investors who see manufactured home communities as good, lucrative investments, or from developers who see the land on which these manufactured home communities sit as really great opportunities for redevelopment and want to make money that way. And when this happens, whether it's somebody new buying the mobile home community and raising all the lot rents, or somebody coming in and buying it to displace everyone, the residents previously were really taken unaware. They would just get a notice saying, hey, you have a new owner, here's what's happening. Because of the legislation that passed several years ago, in those circumstances, the mobile home park owner has to give every resident and the locality in which the park is situated 60 days notice prior to closing that this is happening. And the residents and any nonprofit acting on their behalf has the opportunity to put in their own offer and to purchase that park. If they make an offer that's better than the unsolicited offer that came in, they may have a real opportunity to purchase that park. So that's been a big change. We are trying to make even bigger changes to that area of the code, but I'll just point out one thing that did change just as of July 1st, and that is if you are a manufactured home owner living in one of these parks that is closing for whatever reason, you are now entitled to $5,000 in relocation fees, and significantly, as of July 1st, you do not have to use that money to move your home.
And so that legislation is a powerful tool for these families who are in danger of displacement. Christie really led the charge to get that passed. And since it passed, trailer parks have come up for sale in Fairfax and Loudoun that nonprofits wanted to buy and were not able to buy. But there was a victory this year. The first time that the 60-day notice has worked was here in Charlottesville. Carlton Mobile Home Park was under contract, and Charlottesville Habitat and Piedmont Housing Alliance were able to match the contract. It's a great example of partnership because, you look at the people who lobbied for the legislation, the Virginia Poverty Law Center and the Virginia Housing Alliance, and then you look at the local coalition, which was Habitat for Humanity of Greater Charlottesville, Piedmont Housing Alliance, and the city of Charlottesville, which is contributing to the purchase to prevent the displacement of these 60 low-income households. And it's just been a wonderful example of how it can work. And the trailer park residents, a certain percentage of them have to sign up and say, yes, we want this nonprofit to buy the trailer park. It is usually more likely that a nonprofit can do it, perhaps with government help, than it is for the residents themselves to be able to buy it. We have success stories. Charlottesville Habitat has bought 2 trailer parks to prevent displacement. Catholics for Housing has bought one in Manassas, and Project Homes has bought one in South Richmond.
And the legislature has recognized the value of these affordable houses purchasing the manufactured home parks and maintaining them as affordable housing. There was money, $5 million put in the budget this year, again, a bipartisan effort to create a revolving loan fund for affordable housing providers to use to purchase manufactured home parks. And I don't know if that played into the purchase in Charlottesville. I think it's probably too new to have played into that, but that's down the road could be helpful.
And when you think about the stakes here, I mean, some of these places you're describing, like Charlottesville and Loudoun, those are very expensive places to live. So when you think about 60 families being displaced, there is really nowhere to go that's nearby.
Right. And there are no trailer parks in the Charlottesville area that will accept mobile homes that aren't new. And these mobile homes have a fair amount of age on them. So, yeah, it means that they would have to rent very expensive apartments.
So looking ahead, what would you say are the main housing priorities for the next few sessions coming up?
Well, I will tell you that one of our main priorities is to increase the amount of funding for that Virginia eviction reduction program. We got a tiny increase through last year, but given its success and given the fact that we still have so many renters who are living in unaffordable rental units, meaning they are paying more than 30, 40, 50% of their income toward housing, they are going to need that support. And I look at it as almost a bridge, right, to a time when we will have more affordable units, more vouchers, more opportunities for people to live in a situation where they're only paying 30% of their income for rent. We're not there right now. And so we need significantly more funding for the eviction reduction program so that people can have the help they need when an unexpected expense arises. So we will be asking for funding. Again, not nearly enough, but we're just a small bump up from the 3.45 million to 6.6 million a year. And that's a big one.
Any priorities to add?
Oh, goodness. Well, the Virginia Housing Alliance priorities, the top priority for the next session is to get the Virginia Housing Trust Fund to $100 million a year. And the second priority has to do with the 5,000 family pilot. You want to tell us about that?
So this is, something that the Poverty Law Center has supported for years and worked closely with Virginia Housing Alliance on. Several years ago, there was a study by a professor named Raj Chetty. He looked at families who had been able to, under something called Moving to Opportunity, they were given housing choice vouchers to move specifically to low poverty neighborhoods. And when you go all the way ahead and you look at how they're doing in their 30s, 40s, however old they are now, they have higher incomes. They are more likely to have graduated college. And just overall, we're doing much better than their peers. So taking that data, the 5,000 families program that is being put forth again this year for funding would provide deep subsidies. In other words, monthly vouchers to be used toward rent to families with school-aged children. Because what that study found was that the children who benefited the most, the ones I just described, were mostly under 13 years of age. So I think that's a really important program. It is a pilot. It is the amount of money that they are seeking would serve approximately 5,000 families. But the great thing about that is that they will have data. It will produce data. And our hope is that the data will show that with these vouchers, the children will benefit, and we'll see that in a period of years.
I'm curious, how do, folks like you all and legislators, how do you prioritize various housing issues, like looking at a General Assembly session? Like, there's so much need. How do you make decisions about what to target each year?
Well, I think ultimately it's not our decision. It is the elected officials' decision. So what we do are we are the technicians, we are the advisors. I will tell you that over the past few years, more than any other time, and I have been at the Poverty Law Center for over 20 years now, working on housing for the past 14 of those 20 years. And more than ever in the past, I'd say 2 years in particular, legislators have been coming to us and saying, what can we do to make housing more affordable? What can we do with laws? What can we do with budget items to make housing more affordable, to make housing choice more real, to remove the barriers that people have so they can make better choices? And so there's been a real awakening, I think, among our legislators to the need to look at this every year, move us closer to the vision we all have of providing all Virginians access to affordable housing of their choice.
Christie, I think that puts it very well. It really is the legislators driving it. In this past session, we introduced a pilot for down payment assistance for families who are in less than 60% of area median income. We felt that this was something that would have a huge impact in homeownership in rural areas and in urban areas, particularly with folks coming out of public housing or Section 8 housing. So Christie talked to Delegate Bulova about introducing it. What was his first reaction?
He liked it all along. I mean, I think he really saw the value in it, and I think legislators are particularly excited when we can provide them with some sort of bill or a program to fund through the budget that actually provides long-term sustainable, affordable housing for the people living in Virginia. And this did exactly that.
Right. And on the Senate side, it was patroned by Hashmi and Deeds. And it had, in addition to Democratic support, it had the support of some Republican members who live in rural areas and would love to see more of their constituents be able to purchase a home.
Exactly. And we are going for a second round of something like that. And we'll have, I hate to name names until the budget amendment actually drops, but I think we have secured an excellent patron in the House and still looking for somebody in the Senate to put in a similar budget amendment, $5 million for a pilot program for first-time home buyers purchasing homes in community land trusts. Community land trusts set their own income limits, but I think they're generally pretty similar to what we used for this other pilot program that Overton and I are talking about, where it's really targeted to folks at under 60% area median income. And as you know, Overton, the beauty of encouraging and making purchasing homes in a community land trust available to more people is that those CLT homes will maintain their affordability moving forward, even after they're
Right.
sold.
It's the best tool we've got for permanent affordability. The land trust owns the land, and the family buys the house and has a 99-year lease on the land. And if the first generation passes away and the next generation wants to keep the house, that 99 years starts over. If the family wants to sell, it can only be sold to a family that earns less than 80% of area median income. So it is the strongest tool we have for permanent affordability. So often government funds go into affordable housing, and the guarantee of affordability is only 30 years. And so in our high-cost parts of the state, it's really important to find tools for permanent affordability.
So we've had divided government in Virginia for all of Youngkin's term, but you all have been talking about all sorts of things that have been passed. What's the secret? Like, how do you get things passed in divided government?
I think every legislator knows that some of their constituents can ill afford housing. What do you think, Christie?
Well, I think that's true. I also think if you look at the individual pieces of legislation that did pass, they're all products of some type of compromise. The legislators who get these bills passed are very good at pulling all of the stakeholders together, hearing everybody's concerns, and figuring out how to create more affordable housing opportunities, improve tenant rights, while at the same time respecting the rights of developers and builders and private landlords. And it's all about balancing those things. And I can't emphasize that enough, regardless of whether it's building more affordable housing, providing more down payment assistance, or improving tenant rights. What we are doing is we are trying to get to the point where people have equal power, where a first-time home buyer has enough support that she can look around, have choices, negotiate with builders, negotiate with sellers of homes, and have the tools she needs for that. And similarly, we're also getting to a point where the tenants are getting closer to parity in terms of their rights compared to landlords. And I think that's what legislators are also looking for. How can we improve affordability, improve tenant rights, give people more choices in housing without unnecessarily harming the folks who are creating, developing, selling, and renting these units?
I think one of the things that has changed is that costs have gotten so incredibly high in not just Northern Virginia, in huge chunks of the Commonwealth. And so I think that when legislators see middle-income folks who can't afford to purchase a home, it makes them more aware of the cost burden on low-income rentals and the difficulty of working-class folks to buy a house. And the African-American home ownership rate nationwide is almost at a 50-year low. That's very discouraging, and that's happening, in all demographics. By the way, you ask about setting legislative priorities, and I have to make of course, Christie's right. Ultimately, it's up to the legislators, but I have to make a plug for the Virginia Housing Alliance. It's made up of folks from nonprofits all over the state, and they really are very deliberate in prioritizing those things that have the biggest impact. I mean, you can tell from the things Christie has mentioned, very strategic in what items will make a difference. And there has been progress in addressing homelessness in Virginia. I mean, we all know homelessness is still a huge problem, but if you look at the numbers, there has been real progress in the past 2 decades.
What do you wish more Virginians understood about housing policy?
That's a tough question. Because on the one hand, I want to say I wish more Virginians understood how interrelated it all is, and understood how growing costs for the development of new housing impacts the purchase price, for example. But there's also a part of me that recognizes that there are players in the rental market, in particular large corporate entities that are purchasing relatively low rent rental properties that are purchasing manufactured home communities and are really working hard and often working with one another to make as much money as possible. And I am very much talking about the corporate owners here. I'm not talking about your individual mom and pop landlords. Our experience with them is that they try really hard, not only to provide an excellent home for people, but to work with those individuals to make sure that they find the resources they need to pay the rent and have good lives. I think that the corporate structure does not allow for that kind of pairing, right? And so it's really concerning to me, and I wish more Virginians understood just how much corporate money is invested in particular, rental housing and mobile home communities, and how that increases the cost to the tenants and the manufactured home residents.
I think that I would like for the public to better understand how similar we all are. Sometimes when people are fighting affordable housing in their neighborhood, they are forgetting that these families are just like them. They want a safe, decent, affordable place to live. They want good schools for their children. We are all the same. We strive for the same things, and we need to welcome one another to our neighborhoods.
So listeners will note that I love to ask this question. If you could wave a magic wand and change one policy regarding affordable housing in Virginia, what would you change?
I would create as much legislation as possible to incentivize localities to have inclusionary zoning and other policies that encourage mixed income neighborhoods. I mean, we have seen the strength of it over and over again. Children flourish better when they grow up in a diverse neighborhood where they know people of various educational levels and various income levels and a variety of skills. We don't need homogeneous neighborhoods. We need real neighborhoods that include everybody.
And I will give you the specific policy that will get us there. And I think Overton knows what I'm going to say, but there is a growing interest in something that we are calling, and that Europeans have for decades called, social housing. And this is publicly owned rental housing. I imagine there's a home ownership component, but I'm only familiar so far with the rental component that is owned by the government. So the city of Vienna, Austria is a great example of this. They have owned this housing for decades, and it is available to people at all income levels, to Overton's point. And the rents are based on people's individual incomes. And so it is affordable housing. There is no limit on how long someone can live in that housing. And I believe there's even a right of inheritance. So I believe you can pass that housing on. I'm not 100% sure of that. But the big picture is they have figured out how to have affordable, stable housing for mixed income communities with plenty of green space. And so it not only allows people to have money for other things like medicine and transportation and educational and entertaining events, but also allows them to get to know neighbors who are doing different jobs than they are, who have different incomes, who have different backgrounds. And I'm really excited to see that there are people all over this Commonwealth who are interested in bringing that form of housing here to Virginia.
Well, this is Virginia. Now, do we need a better name than social housing?
Yes,
do we need to call it neighbor housing?
Neighborly housing. Friendly community housing.
Oh, I love it.
So, I heard a lot around this election cycle that, affordable housing is a huge issue. A lot of people care about it. So how can they get involved?
So we have a coalition. It's our AHA coalition. Let's see if I can get the name right. Allies for Housing Action. And we welcome anybody and everybody who's interested in getting involved in advocacy at the State General Assembly. That's what that particular group is focused on. We have monthly virtual meetings, one evening a month. And then during the legislative session, we have weekly meetings. We provide information about the legislation and budget amendments that are pending. We provide information about how people can contact their legislators to tell them about the importance of affordable housing and supporting the legislation and budget items that will increase the supply and make the current supply more affordable. And we're even going to have another tenant day of action where people can join us in the General Assembly building to talk to their legislators. So that is a very concrete way people can get involved.
It's all about being a good neighbor, and there are a lot of ways of doing it. Now, of course, one of my favorite ways is for you to volunteer for your local Habitat affiliate or some other local housing nonprofit. You can tell them whether you want to swing a hammer or work behind the scenes or help with legislative advocacy. And most of the housing nonprofits in Virginia are involved with legislative advocacy through the Virginia Housing Alliance. And so you can tell your local nonprofit that you want to be involved in legislative advocacy. And you also can just contact your legislators and tell them that you are concerned about affordable housing and you hope they will support affordable housing legislation.
This was great. Thank you both so much. I really, really appreciate it. That was Christie Marra, Director of Housing Advocacy for the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and Overton McGehee, Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity, Virginia. I also want to thank our assistant producer, Sarah Bastinelli. Thank you for listening, and if you learned something in this episode, share it with a friend. We'd really appreciate it. Bold Dominion is a member of the Virginia Audio Collective at WTJU, and you can find all our episodes at bolddominion.org.